Tim Autrey, and welcome to this resource video for the 7 Natural Principles of Human Performance. If you already have a copy of the book, 7 Natural Principles of Human Performance, great! If not, you can grab a hard copy, Kindle version, or audio version on Amazon. You can also find more information about the book at 7naturalprinciples.com. That's 7naturalprinciples.com. This video is an excerpt from the PPI Human Performance Leadership Masterclass, which is part of PPI Lab. You can access the full course as well as a ton of resources to help you improve safety, reliability, efficiency, productivity, and profitability by joining PPI Lab. More information is available at ppiweb.io/PPI Lab. That's ppiweb.io/PPI Lab. Thanks for being here. Let's get to it. In this episode, we're going to briefly go through some of the latest discoveries in neuroscience so we can understand what's physically going on within this organ we call the brain. And then we're going to talk about how the brain manufactures chemicals. In this case, we're going to talk specifically about hormones, the 4 predominant hormones that influence the way we feel and therefore the reason we make choices and take actions and take those actions in a certain way. I've kind of coined the phrase psychobiology. I don't know if I've ever seen that anywhere else, even if that's a real term, but that's what we're going to call it. Let's talk about the brain here for just a few moments. You know, there's all kinds of stuff going on today about artificial intelligence and all of that. And even though we've made tremendous progress in that, we're not even close to the capabilities of our brains, of the human mind. What it can achieve is absolutely phenomenal. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how it happens internally, because as a leader or an influencer, if we understand, first of all, to have impact upon ourselves and then as well as to influence others, if we understand what's going on in our brains and then how that's manufacturing a cocktail of chemicals that's making us feel a certain way, having that level of awareness anyway, we don't have to be experts in this, but having that level of awareness can make us much more powerful influencers. So what happens in our brain is we have these things called synapses. Now our brains function basically upon electricity. You've got electrical pulses going through there and they hook up and they link up and that's what generates thoughts and that's how thoughts come forward and generates chemicals and everything else that happens in the brain. So what generates the electrical pulses, these guys are called synapses, and we have 150 trillion of them in the typical brain. Now, what happens is a synapse will fire and it'll send an electrical pulse from one point to another, and that is referred to as a neural connection or a neuron. And our typical brain, or a typical brain, has approximately 84 billion neurons. Pretty amazing when you think about the numbers. Now, what happens with these neurons, as you can see in this particular video, you'll have a synapse fire, and that electrical pulse will process across a gap to a receptor. So it'll have a sender and a receptor, and it'll go across and across and across and across. And when we have something that manifests as an actual thought, which may or may not end up as a feeling, what has happened is a bunch of these synapses is fired, and they've made the neural connections. And these connections happen in patterns. Now, I'm sure you would agree with me that we all have memories and we have consistent thoughts and current thoughts and a lot of things that help make us us, right? Well, what happens is when you have a thought over a period of time and you have that thought again and again and again, you've got a synapse firing and you've got an electrical connection going across that gap where the neural connections are, the neuron is. And over time, if that synapse fires across that gap enough, the connections will actually grow to physically connect, just like they would if you had a couple of wires and you were gapping electricity across of it. Eventually, the elements would combine to cause a physical connection. Some of us are familiar with that. Well, that's what's going on in our brain. So one of the common phrases in neuroscience is what fires together wires together. And over a period of time, we have created millions of these neural connections or billions of these neural connections in our brains. And that has made us today who we are. Now, one of the most fascinating aspects of things they've discovered recently in neuroscience is that Have you ever heard the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Well, neuroscience has discovered that's not true. We can change the wiring in our brains. It's called neuroplasticity. And what they've discovered is, if you can, as I already mentioned, so you have the same thought over and over and over again, you eventually end up with a connection, right? And that creates our brain the way it is. Well, neuroplasticity implies that we can break bad neural connections and we can make new ones. And recent studies have shown that in 60 minutes of focused concentration, you can double the number of neural connections in your brain relative to a specific thing. So 60 minutes of focused attention. Now, that sounds really simple, but have you ever tried to specifically focus on one thing for even 60 seconds, let alone 60 minutes? The thing is, it's possible. And one of the ways to kind of, if you think about cooking, right? You put something in the oven, it might take you 45 minutes to heat it up. You put it in a microwave, it's a minute and a half. Meditation is to our brains what really kind of a microwave is to cooking. It provides a direct connection to do this sort of thing. So if you think about what meditation is, and I don't know if you've ever meditated, and it's your deal whether you ever want to or not, but if you've ever tried, or if you're good at it, you know that the basis of it is to quiet all the noise in your mind, and to, if you go in with intention, you can actually directly focus on something for a period of time. So that's kind of one of the ways to make this happen. For our purposes here, the fascinating thing is to understand that it is possible, okay? And then it's totally up to you what you want to do with that information. So I want to talk now about these neurons, because you may or may not have heard this before, but we have energy centers in our bodies, and there are 7 of them. They start with number 1 down in the nether regions, and then you move up through number 2. Number 3 is basically where your stomach and your diaphragm are. Number 4, you move up to your heart and across your chest. Number 5 is basically your throat. Number 6 is in the back of your brain, basically where your pineal gland is. And then number 7 is kind of in the center of your brain. And you may, in spiritual terms, you may have heard of these called chakras before. It's exactly the same thing. We like to call them energy centers. One of the fascinating discoveries they've made recently is neurons don't just exist in our brains. They exist in every one of these energy centers. And the other thing they've discovered is, where do you think the second largest concentration of neurons are? Obviously, the biggest concentration's in our brains. Where do you think the second largest concentration is? It's in your gut. So have you ever heard the phrase before, a gut feeling, or, my gut's telling me to do this? Well, it literally is. And I think that's fascinating. Now, what does that have to do with how you approach things and all that? It's just kind of interesting, I think, to know that physiologically, these mechanisms that are supporting our choices, actions, and behaviors. And what I want to move into now is what I refer to as psychobiology. And the brain is an incredible manufacturer of chemicals and hormones. And there are 4 predominant hormones that influence how we feel. And since we know we go from thinking to feeling to doing, feeling is incredibly important in our choices, actions, and behaviors. So I'm actually going to step over to the whiteboard. We're going to walk through this pretty quickly. But again, I find this stuff fascinating. And I think as a leader or influencer, you may or may not be that interested in all of this. This stuff is really, it kind of turns me on. But the deeper your depth of knowledge and awareness on this, the more powerful an influencer you'll be able to be. So check this out. In your handout on page 39, Bravo, you have a diagram that looks a lot like this, and you've got some blanks to fill in. So let's go ahead and fill in this one right here. You want to write the word me there, and you want to write the word we at the top on the other side. So these are the 4 primary hormones, or the 4 chemicals that influence our feelings. And these are the me chemicals, and these are the we chemicals. So let's go ahead and put a couple of letters in here, like that. You may or may not have any idea what these stand for, and you might be thinking, oh yeah, I know where he's headed with all this. Or you might say, well, I don't have a clue. The D stands for dopamine. I'm sure you've probably heard of that before, because the more we've discovered about this, the more information that's out there about it. The N stands for endorphins. And if you've ever engaged in any kinds of sports, you're undoubtedly familiar with endorphins. Now over here, we have an S and we have an O. The S is for serotonin, and the O is for oxytocin. Now, let's talk about each of these real quickly. So, we're familiar with what endorphins are, right? If you've ever run, exercised, worked out, done any kind of physical activity, you know that you get to a certain point of physical pain or exhaustion and your body starts to generate endorphins to help you deal with it. These are the strongest painkillers known to man, way stronger than morphine or anything like that, and all manufactured internally and perfectly legal. It's fantastic. If you are a runner and you've ever experienced what's referred to as the runner's high, and it could be on a ellipse machine, it could be a spinning class on a bicycle, it could be, you know, actually running, whatever it is, you get to a certain point and your body starts to get flooded with endorphins, and you actually get a nice natural high. It's pretty cool. So that's endorphins. Most of us are familiar with those. Down here we have dopamine. Now, dopamine is generated by your brain when you're in pursuit of something. Dopamine is one of the reasons that video games are so darn popular, because, man, when I'm working to get to that next level and I'm getting the next level and the next level, dopamine is just flooding my body and it makes me feel good about me. The thing that's interesting about dopamine is this is the again, as I mentioned, this is the hormone that is generated when we're pursuing something. This is the hormone that's responsible for a lot of addictive behaviors. I don't know if you've ever had this feeling, but you go online and you do your research and you go onto Amazon and you buy something and you just feel good. That's dopamine. So if you happen to have an issue with that, which I'm sure you don't, but people do have shopping addictions, it's dopamine they're generating when they go out and they buy all this stuff. Gambling addictions, it's that seeking, the thrill of the hunt, the thrill of the seek, the thrill of the possibility of winning, generates dopamine. Now, relative to other types of addictions, alcohol and drug addictions and things like that, dopamine hits the same cell receptor sites as cocaine does. So it functions kind of in the same manner as substance addictions as well. Real easy to become addicted here. And again, depending upon your makeup, some of us are predispositioned toward addiction and some of us aren't. But if you are, this is likely one of the culprits. All right then, so those are the me chemicals. This is about me pursuing something. This is about me anesthetizing myself because there's pain involved in pursuing something, and those tend to work together like that. Over on the other side, we have the we chemicals. The top one is serotonin, and the bottom one is oxytocin. Now, serotonin floods our bodies when we get some type of positive reinforcement externally. So now, let's go back to the whole video game thing for a second. You're chasing, you're getting dopamine, and then you reach that next level, or you kill the villain, or you whatever, wipe out the aliens, or whatever it happens to be, and you get that feeling of the game comes in and says congratulations, and it does all these things. You get some serotonin. So you can see now one of the reasons why video games are so darn popular. This is the hormonal aspect of it. Oxytocin is the hormone that's generated when we feel really close, intimately connected with another human being. And the strongest production of oxytocin that has been documented anyway is a nursing mother. You think about that. What could possibly be more intimate than taking this little person who you dearly love and you're actually providing them with life sustenance and you're physically right together, lots of oxytocin being produced there. So a couple of other interesting aspects of this. As I mentioned, and if you remember the Maslow's hierarchy, where we went from physiological needs to safety and security to love and belongingness, what was the next one above that? Esteem. And remember when I was talking about that, about how there's internally self-generated esteem, and people who are mostly introverts tend to do that more. Their locus of control is more internal. And then there's external aspects of the esteem process as well, and that's the stuff coming in from the outside. Well, when we get positive reinforcement, approbation, recognition coming from the outside, that tends to create serotonin, and it helps make us feel good about us. And folks who are extroverts, and by the way, extrovert doesn't necessarily mean that you are outgoing and gregarious and all of that. Introvert and extrovert, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. It's where the terminology I like to use is it's where your locus of control resides. So I have spoken to huge audiences. I've spoken to audiences that have been simulcast to 10,000 people. And I love speaking in public, and I am a card-carrying introvert. If I had my choice of going to a party with a bunch of people or hanging out by myself or maybe just with my wife, I'd much rather be by myself or just with my wife. I like quiet, I like control, I like to be internal. I get up early in the morning and I have a couple of hours of me time, I like to call it, and it's just me. I don't have anybody else that I have to do anything with, and I don't typically dive into anything on the internet or anything. It's very introspective, it's meditation, it's yoga, it's all that stuff, and I know you don't really care about all that, but that is card-carrying introvert type stuff, because I get my juice, my energy internally. Extroverts, on the other hand, get a lot of their energy and their esteem from the people around them. So for me, as an introvert, I don't get as much, well, I'm not going to say I don't get as much, but I'm not as dependent on externally generated or externally triggered serotonin as an extrovert would be. And again, the point is, serotonin comes from association, generically speaking, with other people, and when we get positive reinforcement, positive affirmation, recognition, it causes a flood of serotonin in our bodies. And each one of these hormones, again, makes us feel good about us. Now, you may or may not have noticed that there's a little red line here, and again, the reason that I put this in a grid is because dopamine and serotonin are kind of in opposition to one another. When dopamine levels go up, serotonin levels tend to go down. So you think about somebody that's predominantly self-centered, the more they do whatever it is that's generating dopamine for them may make them care less and less and less about what other folks think about them. When we get into substance abuse, like alcohol, any kind of addiction actually, think about it. When a person is addicted to something and they go overboard, and it can be gambling, it can be whatever, certainly alcohol, drugs, their behaviors tend to begin to be negative in the eyes of other people. So as they pursue more and more here, they get less and less and less of this. So you see, you get a vicious cycle going on. And one of the other things that I find fascinating about this whole serotonin thing, there are a lot of people on planet Earth that are what we call stress eaters. And I do that every now and then. When I'm feeling really down, I'll eat a bunch of stuff that's, if you look at it dietarily, it's probably not the best stuff for me. And I didn't really understand why I was doing that, but I did know when I did that, I kind of felt better. Well, here's the thing. Think about yourself. If you do that at all, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, but most of us who ever eat, and clearly I don't do it a lot, but every now and then, you ever eat because you're stressed out or you're not feeling good about yourself, right? What kind of foods do you want to eat? Well, for me, it's pasta. And for a lot of people, it's like potato chips. The point is simple carbs. Some people will dive into candy or popcorn or stuff like that. Simple carbs, simple carbs, simple carbs. Simple carbs directly help your body manufacture serotonin. So you are physiologically actually generating a hormone that helps you feel better about you. Now, of course, if you do that a bunch, there's some real negative aspects to that. Every now and then, go for it. It doesn't hurt you at all. That's according to Dr. Tim Autrey here. So anyway, one other thing I want to point out about this before we move on. There is one activity that human beings engage in that involves a quest. Okay? It involves a quest. It involves a lot of intimate interactivity. By virtue of the quest and the fact that you've been accepted, serotonin is generated, and because there's some physical activity involved, endorphins get generated, and so we have this nifty cycle There's only one activity that I'm aware of that human beings engage in. It is one of the most popular activities in all of humanity, generates all 4 of these hormones, which is probably why it's so darn popular. You got any idea what it is? I'm just going to leave you with that and you can figure it out. Okay, back over here. So that is psychobiology. We take a look at the pretty slide. You can see the me chemicals, the we chemicals, and we've already talked about these as much as we need to. So that is it for episode 5. In episode 6, we're going to move on and talk about the functioning of the brain, not from the neuron and the hormone level, but basically the evolution of the brain and how that greatly impacts how we conduct ourselves, and it greatly impacts where an individual is coming from relative to your ability to influence them. And when you understand this and how to deal with it, you become a much, much better influencer. All right, so that's it for now. Talk to you in episode 6.